If you have been struggling to set and achieve really big goals, this episode is for you, so listen in.
Hey, this is Brad Block, host of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle.
Well, hello and welcome to the show. This is your guest host, Dr. Amna Shabbir, and today I have an incredible guest with me, Dr. Sarah Glova. Dr. Sarah Glova transforms what ifs into action. After a career as a business reporter and a podcast host, she turned her experience interviewing successful people into insights about the art and science of achievement. A business owner herself, her journey from entrepreneur to sought-after international speaker has taken her from California to Qatar, from the TEDx stage to events with Panasonic, Microsoft, and more. And in 2024, she was inducted into the North Carolina Women Business Owners Hall of Fame. Dr. Glova is the president-elect of the National Speakers Association Carolinas chapter. She teaches technical writing, business communication, and storytelling at NC State and Duke University, and she loves taking the stage to help others focus on achieving really big goals. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Glova.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shabbir. I've really been looking forward to joining.
This is wonderful. And that's why the conversation, we're going to talk a lot about goal setting. And so before I delve a little deeper, when I heard your TEDx, how to achieve goals with a single page, I was really drawn into that title. And I found the talk itself to be very fascinating. But before we get into the talk itself, can you tell us a little bit about your journey leading up to the TEDx talk? What inspired you to share this particular message that surrounds goal achievement?
That's a great question. I had so much fun coming up with that TEDx talk. I went into it with a mission. I have a chance to work with a lot of students, both at NC State and at Duke University. And I typically work with graduate students, many of whom are coming back to school after working on their careers and they've decided that they're ready to level up. And the wonderful thing about working with these students in the topics that I teach is often they have amazing technical backgrounds, but they're looking to level up in their careers, maybe enter into those leadership positions. And so I get to tell them all the time, your degree will get you hired, but the content I teach you around business communication or leadership, that's what's going to get you promoted. So I'm in this business of what I call unlocking potential. My students are already incredible, but they often need some support, some help learning new information and new tools to level up in their careers. And after spending, I don't want to admit how many years doing that, one of the things that I learned from working with my students is how often they set these really big goals for themselves, but then struggle to put tools in place to achieve them. And very often I noticed that when I would talk to my students about their goals in a short conversation, maybe in office hours, we would get some clarity and then they would get fearless. And so I used to call it like the fearless clarity. And I just wanted that for more folks. It's so freeing when you feel like you have this really big goal, but it's digestible. And that's where the idea of a single page. I was actually talking to a friend, and this is how the TEDx starts. I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was sharing my frustration that more people don't have the tools that we need to achieve really big goals. We don't know how to work on a goal. And I said to my friend, even if you wanted to be president of the United States, I could help you come up with a plan for that goal. And it wouldn't need to be more than just like one piece of paper. And my friend was like, what? And based on that reaction, I knew I had something. And that became a challenge for me. Can I help people set a plan for their goal that's no more than a single page so that it's not overwhelming, so they get that fearless clarity? And that's the TEDx. And I'm really excited to see that it's resonated with people.
I really am going to latch onto this word because in our audience, we have physicians at all different stages of the journey. So from just taking care of patients, and just as in air quotes, from really being deep in that academic space where you're trying to find your way from pre-med, med school, residency, fellowship, anywhere. So the simplicity of your message really resonated with me because a lot of those times when we are wanting to achieve those big goals, we step back. So can you share a little bit more about how can we achieve those big goals and how can we do all of that with just one page?
Absolutely. So I love that you're attaching to this fearless clarity idea because it's a really simple way of explaining the single page. I think that there's the two parts of it, the fearless and the clarity. I love to start with the clarity. So oftentimes when I'm working with somebody who has really big goals, they haven't sat down and really gotten clear about what that goal would look like. And a phrase I use a lot is your goal should be as unique to you as your fingerprint. So, Dr. Shabbir, even if you and I both wanted to write a book, we might have different reasons for why we want to write a book, what we want that book to do, the impact that we think it'll have on our lives and out in the community for the readers, the skills that we're going to bring to the table. When you get clear about your goal, I think thinking through what is it that I have that's going to help me achieve this goal? What are the skills that I bring to the table? Spending some time and outlining that and getting really clear is so important. And that can be the top third of your page. After that, we need a bit of the fearless. So we need to be ready to take a step forward. And that's often where people get stuck. They have this really big goal. They can see the top of the mountain, but then they realize again that they've got this long way to go. And it's, do I go this way? Do I go off to the right? Do I go through the forest? Do I go over the lake? Like, where do I go? And that's where people get stuck. And so what I encourage folks to do is to pick 4 dates, just pick 4 deadlines. And under those, list some crucial actions. And this is important, that word crucial, because oftentimes what I see is folks will do some procrastination actions. So it's the person who wants to get a new job, but they spend time like updating their LinkedIn profile picture and they spend a lot of time tweaking their resume, but they're not really putting themselves out there. So you can ask yourself, what are the crucial actions? If I really want to start a consultancy or I want to become the leveraged medical expert of my local news organization, I could spend time tweaking my resume. Or I could try working on making connections with those folks. And so thinking through what those crucial actions would be and then assigning yourself those crucial actions under those 4 deadlines. Now you've got a clear path. There's that fearless part where you really just need the energy to take those steps forward. Now, something that doesn't come across in those first 2 sections is the last section, my favorite, which is community. Who's going to help you? Who's going to keep you accountable? And so then in that last section, you want to make a list of the folks who can support you, really thinking through who else has been to that mountaintop, who's already been there and can tell me what it looks like, who's going to hold my hand, who's going to keep me accountable, and then who's going to be the coach on the sidelines, helping me to improve on my skills as I go. So that's a quick summary of what the TEDx goes over and my philosophy on the 1-page goals. And with those 3 sections, I think that folks will have enough information to do the most important thing, which is
taking a step. I keep saying that the biggest gift that you can give yourself is that of making a decision and taking action, because I love the example that you gave of we're going to keep perfecting our LinkedIn and tweaking our CV. Let me play around with the fonts for the next 1 week. So and I know this because I personally have struggled with perfectionism and I continue to struggle with it in some shape or form. When we talk about goal setting, what are some of the common traps that you see? I know you work with high achievers. A lot of
I
people
do.
will start falling into perfectionism being one. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
There are so many that come to mind, but since you called out high achievers, let me talk about one that many of my high achievers struggle with. And I'm going to put myself in this category because I similarly struggle with perfectionism. And I was always the I've got to get the A plus or bust kind of kid. And that can be really dangerous. One of the traps that I see is for folks who know that they can achieve at a really high level or who have really big goals. Sometimes they can be their own worst enemy. And what we see is they are too smart, they're too intelligent. You set this goal, and your big, capable, intelligent brain begins to dissect it and to share all the ways it could go wrong. And so instead of starting or sticking with it and being consistent, evidence of, oh, I knew that might happen, and then you abandon it. You were just too smart for it. And what we need to do instead is value the consistency. We have to be able to say to ourselves, okay, I knew I wanted to start this podcast. And yes, I'm on episode 4 and I only have 12 followers. And I think 3 of those are my mom. I knew this was going to happen. That's one thread, right? I knew this was going to happen. There are too many podcasts out there. I'm not sure this is going to be too, da, 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 and we go down that way. Whereas if we can shut that achievement, shut that intelligence off and just say, I'm sticking to this for consistency. It doesn't matter how many followers I have yet because my goal here is to learn. That's where we're going to see people achieving really big things. And so you almost have to fight against your instincts to dissect that or to intelligently analyze it. This is always going to be a continuum. For example, if you're starting a business, it's really important to know your numbers, to know your financials, and to have a good awareness of that. You have to make sure that you're staying committed to why you wanted to do this. If you wanted to leverage a podcast, it's likely because you wanted to grow in your credibility and you wanted to get your message out there to more people. 4 episodes is not enough to test whether or not that's going to work. And so sticking with that and not letting that over intelligence derail that path, That's one of the biggest things that I see for my high achievers.
The word that's coming to my mind is like the grittiness that we need and perseverance to just stick to that specific goal when you're not. And I love how you said our big, beautiful brains will just like tell us all these things that can go wrong, and we'll hide behind over intellectualization of everything that we can, preventing ourselves and staying in that safe zone of making things pretty and perfect before actually taking the step. And then finding evidence of all the things that are going wrong. As someone who is recently working on that, in personal presence for myself on YouTube and podcasting, I find that really spoke to me. And I know it speaks
Mhm.
to a lot of physicians in the audience that are building their personal brands and in a whole different way that involves yourself, putting yourself out there. So, another thing that comes up a lot is you mentioned like crucial steps and like the crucial component of it. And how do you help people break that down? Because what is crucial for some, really, like the font is not that crucial. And I keep getting asked this question recently, what are the fonts for my brand? And I don't know yet. And I'm like a couple of years in, we're still figuring it out. What would you say to somebody who's really paralyzed in between these crucial steps?
Yeah, it's a great question. Figuring out what the crucial actions are for you and for your goal. I think when you sit down to work on your goal and you're looking at the outcome that you want, I think it's really important to ask what you need in order to get there. And so, just as an example, if you're focused on growing your business, growing your brand, what do you really need to get there? Now, Dr. Shabir, you just mentioned you might get requests for a brand guide. Folks who are working with you might say, what are your fonts? But asking yourself based on your goals, is that something that you need to have an answer to? Now, if you're trying to build some kind of design agency and folks are white labeling your design content, absolutely you need to know your fonts. For somebody like me, I've been in business since 2012 and I was freelancing before that. I still don't have a consistent brand guide. It's just not something that's necessary for my time and energy. But for crucial action, something that is necessary for me, I need to be out there. I need to be having conversations with folks, meeting people, meeting event planners. A big part of what I do is speaking at events and speaking at conferences. And the best way for me to find organizations that are looking for a speaker to help engage their audiences, professional development topics, it's not to improve my SEO, right? To improve my searchability on the web. It's not to improve my brand guide and have more consistent fonts. It's talking to people and meeting people. And I am a huge introvert. Like on the introvert extrovert scale, I'm so over in the eye. So it takes a lot of energy for me to do that. And I think that's also usually an indication of a crucial action. So, one is what are the business outcomes I need and what would get me there? Two is like, what am I a little bit afraid of? Usually that's an indication that's probably a crucial action for you. I'm a little bit afraid of meeting new people. I'm a little bit afraid of going to new networking events. And that's usually a sign that's probably somewhere I need to lean into and figuring out what that looks like. How can I balance that so that I don't burn myself out? What does it look like for me? Is it a certain number of events a month or a certain number of conversations? Luckily, as my business has grown, I haven't need to do as much of that. So it does change over time. But sitting down and having that clarity to think about your business outcomes and the things that maybe make you a little nervous can usually point you in the right direction.
We have to lean into reconnect with purpose and why. And so that what I'm getting at is really going to be an anchoring force when you're looking at both consistency as well as showing up in ways that is uncomfortable, like you mentioned, that you are more towards the introverted part of the scale. And why are you going to keep showing up? So really reconnecting and
Yeah.
leaning into that purpose. Can you
And you
share a
use
little
that
bit?
word anchor. I
Yes.
love the word anchor that you used, like anchoring, because that's another reason the one-page plan is just one page. It needs to be somewhere you can see it because you're going to have that day where even though you said that part of your goal was to build this consultancy and you know that part of that is going to be reaching out to different medical experts, you still get that resistance to it. It's still uncomfortable. And sometimes, especially for my achievers, we get the sense that uncomfortable is bad. I'm so uncomfortable doing this. That means it's bad. I'm doing it wrong, or I shouldn't be doing it. I'm not made to be doing this work. And that's not true. It's just a little bit of friction. And sometimes, some of my achievers like this. Sometimes that's a sign that you're doing something that others might not do. So if you get to that point where reaching out to those experts feels a little uncomfortable, you can say to yourself, oh, wow, this is a bit uncomfortable. I bet other people are going to stop here. So if I keep going, I'm going to get leaps and bounds ahead in this goal that I have because I'm doing something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. So you can try to shift your mindset and think of it as, oh, I'm winning. I got to something uncomfortable. That's a good sign. But also just making sure you're not thinking of it as, oh, I'm uncomfortable. That's a bad thing. I shouldn't be doing this. So having that one page somewhere that you can see it is really important to help keep that as an anchoring thought as that frustration or that uncertainty or that uncomfortable feeling comes up.
That is wonderful, and I love how you're saying that we should have it somewhere that we can actually see it, and it's simple enough. It's a one page. You can carry it on your phone. You can stick it in your study. You can have it with you and keep coming back to that as an anchor. What are some of the fears in your experience when you start talking about this? We talked about some resistance, such as perfectionism and such as staying in the safe space. Are there any other like common fears you feel people suffer from or face very much when they start talking about goals? And as we record this is January 2025, and I just came back from the gym, which was full. So lots of different goals in the air right now for people in various parts of their life.
Yeah, the fears part is real. So I feel like so far in our conversation, we've talked a lot about taking action, which is really that part two of the identifying the crucial actions in the single page. But a lot of fears come in the part one, which is getting that clarity. People are afraid to say really loudly and really proudly the things that they really want because usually those are things that they've wanted for a long time. Maybe not in the same form. I'm not saying that every 7-year-old dreams of developing a medical consultancy, but maybe the dream of being a sought out expert or having your own business or being able to speak on stages, whatever it is. And then there's that fear of, but if I announce it and I don't get it, I'm going to be so sad. I'm going to be so disappointed with myself. So it's almost better. And this is often unconscious. We don't consciously think this, but it's almost better if I just never say it out loud and it's always a possibility. As soon as I announce it, it's either going to happen or it's not. But it can live in my head as a possibility. So there's some unconscious fear there. And so getting folks to really name, like, this is what I want can sometimes be a challenge. And one of the things I love is what I call a toddler why. So I have young kids, and my youngest, especially, is in his why stage right now. So if I say, we're going to go outside, you need to put your shoes on, he says, why? And I'm like, we need to protect your feet when we go outside. And he's like, why? I'm like, you keep going. If you told me that your goal, as an example, was to grow your business to a certain level, and I said, why? You might have an easy answer. It might be, I want the financial independence. And also, I'd love to be able to be seen as an expert in this business. If I asked you why again, you'd probably have to pause. Well, and then you'd explain what financial independence would mean for you, or you would talk about what it would mean for you to be an expert. And then I say why again. That's usually where people get really frustrated. And sometimes that's where they admit what their real goal is. So you might have a business owner that you're questioning, why do you want this? Why do you want this? Why do you want this? And they finally say, you know what? One day I just want to sell this business and I want to help coach other people on having a successful business, but I can't do that until I've sold my own business.
Mm.
Is that true? Do we know that for sure? Do we know that you need to be doing that in order to unlock the thing that you really want? So I think not skipping over that first part where we get really clear about what we want and why we want it, and taking the time to ask us that toddler why, getting clear about the values that influence our decision. If part of the reason that you want something is because you know it'll make your family proud of you, that's great. But truly understanding, what is it that's going to make them proud? Are you looking to achieve a certain level of financial success? Do you want a certain amount of credibility? Do you want to be seen as a wholehearted human who is prioritizing well-being? What are you looking for in that support from your family? So I think that, and getting really clear about that, is something that a lot of people are almost unconsciously afraid of.
It is so critical. And when you were speaking, I was thinking back of one of my earliest clients that I coach, and I asked this incredible physician, what is your vision 5 to 10 years from now? And there was silence. And that is such a basic question. When I ask this question a lot of times with individuals, especially when they're deep in burnout, and at the post, I'm done with my training, I'm now practicing phase, there is silence. And
Mm.
we're not clear at our goals, and yet we're like running and we're taking action. So I love how you separate the two in terms of getting deep into your why and asking yourself this question, like, what do you need? A lot of times, here's what happens is, with high achievers is like this external validation piece is the loudest, and we don't even know it till we just keep going down and asking ourselves, like, why are we doing this in the first place? Why is this
Yeah.
my goal? Or is this a goal that has been handed to me by society, such as I have also shared like some self-care goals, which as a woman, society has told me I should have.
Yeah.
Like manicures and pedicures are really not my self-care goals.
Me neither. I'm so sorry to show my, like, boring nails, but it's not to say anything against women or, people in general who
Yeah,
value manicures and pedicures. That
yeah,
is awesome. I love that for you. I tell people all the time, "Oh my gosh, your nails look amazing." That is not for me something that I enjoy. I actually don't like the feeling of it on my hands, and so for me, I've just made that choice of that's not something that I'm gonna spend my time or money on. And I love it for others. It's more about that freedom to choose and the fact that we had some intentionality around that. Did I sit down and think through this? So that I'm not embarrassed if I go to an event and my nails aren't done. I'm not thinking, "Oh my gosh, I should have gotten a manicure," because I know that's a choice. That's a choice that I made.
absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes I get them done, sometimes I don't get them done. But I really, for a long time, like internalized at it was as part of this manual that I was supposed to follow. So I love that we have the autonomy and we have to choose, and that does not take away from us or the other. But we can
Right.
all be in this coexisting space with our personal nail choices. Let's just say that.
100%.
So,
And it's questioning exactly what you just said. Is this a requirement? I'm treating it like a requirement. Is it? Is this a requirement for me? And the answer might be yes. There are a couple requirements in my life. I feel like I am required to show up as an emotionally intelligent parent. That is really important to me. There aren't a lot of requirements in the act of doing that where a parent might say to me, like, "Oh, do you do XYZ with your kids?" We treat so many things like requirements when they really aren't. But in order to question them, we need that reflection space. And that's what so many of us are missing. That's the first section on that one-page plan.
and yes, I think a lot of listeners are parents, and they're going to be able to relate very strongly with that because we're constantly questioning. At least I find myself constantly marinating in mom guilt,
Yeah.
different
Oh,
of different levels. So I love that you said that we can show up as it can be the same value, but how we actually execute can be different for each and every one of us.
100%. And in that one page, I mentioned briefly that you should outline your strengths. When you're questioning whether or not you should do something a certain way, whether that's with parenting and you're trying to decide whether or not to be a room parent, to volunteer in your kid's school, or executing your business. You say you want to grow your business. Guess what? There are 1,000,000,000 ways to do that, right? You can start a podcast, you can start a YouTube channel, you can start a newsletter, you can hire a PR company. Like you could go on and on with all these options. What's going to be best for you and your strengths and what you value. So that's why you outline that on the one-page plan. I'm not a volunteer school parent. I'm terrible with details. I'm the worst event planner you've ever met. I once ordered a birthday cake for the wrong day. I'm awful. And so I that's not a great use of my skill set. But there are other ways that I show up for my kids and for my kids' school, and I've tried to base that in my skills and my values. And so that can be a way to alleviate some of that mom guilt. Now, do I still every once in a while feel a pang of, "Oh, I should be room parent?" Yes, but then I remind myself that I would be a terrible room parent. I support our existing room parents in other ways, and everyone's better for that.
Leaning into our strengths. So, before we pivot a little bit to a different part of my questioning, if you were to now look back and summarize, and we're looking back at this one pager, just walking through after a conversation and tailoring it specifically to physicians who are thinking about goals all the time.
I think that at this point, I've worked on this so much that I could tailor it down to a sentence. I think, and if I could just give everybody the freedom to think about their goals in a way, just remember that it's an experiment, right? You want to start with experimenting on the big goal that you have. And to do that, you want to get clear on what you want and why you want it, how you're going to get there, and who's going to help you. And those are the three sections. And the reason I use that word experiment is because it really is about collecting data. We have this idea with New Year's resolutions. It's I'm going to work out every day. And then we miss a day and we're like, I'll try again next year. No, that's good data. Like what happened that day that got in your way? And how can we make this more fun for you so that you want to do it every day or whatever your goal is? Or can we adjust this goal so that it's not every day so you have a little bit more space for the realities of life? Treating it as an experiment and then making sure that one page just reminds you what you want and why you want it, how you're going to work on it, what those crucial actions are, and who's going to help you.
Thank you for summarizing that so beautifully. So, the pivot that I want to make a little bit and ask you this question is as many physicians, they struggle with personal fulfillment and professional responsibilities. It's this constant balancing act because we're all marinating right now in this epidemic of burnout and moral injury. It's very real. As a storytelling expert, you're a faculty storyteller. And how do you recommend we can potentially use that to reconnect to our purpose? Because we talked a lot about our whys as well right now.
I love using storytelling, and my PhD is in instructional technology, specifically focused on adult learning and curriculum building. And so for me, the question of as adults, how do we learn and what tools can help us is a really important one. And we see in the research that folks have a perspective that as they get older, they're going to get more and more set in their ways and they're going to learn less. And that's not true. We see that people's personalities continue to change and to develop as they grow older. And I think it's really important that we remind ourselves that we are still telling our story. Our story is still unfolding. No matter what chapter we're on, that story is still being written. And so that first idea of just acknowledging that there is a story. And then two, remembering that we need to take time to understand our story. I don't think we spend enough time reflecting. It's really important to me. Now, we're talking about burnout. And so here I am being like, also do this thing. I don't want to put anything else on people's to do lists. And so, as a reminder, this is not something that has to take a long time. Taking a couple minutes at the end of each month to look back at the month and ask yourself, what did you enjoy the most? What are you looking forward to next month? Or at the end of the week, looking at the week ahead. Are there any changes you can make that would make the week better for you? Are there any people you need to talk to recruit help so that the next week goes easier for you? I think we write these stories sometimes in our head about what our life should look like or what it's going to look like. And so putting ourselves more in charge as the narrator is often just taking that little bit of time for reflection. And oftentimes I find that especially my high achieving adults just need the reminder that it doesn't mean you have to do a meditative yoga retreat for 2 weeks. You can do this for a few minutes, but we don't put that time in. We don't remember to set that time. And so I want to invite folks who are considering using storytelling to remember that they're the narrator here. They can take a few minutes to set up, either looking back at what's been working or looking forward at what they need, and then using that story to make sure that they're in line with their values as they think about what their life looks like. Is that how they want to be remembered? Is that the way that they want their kids to describe them and what it was like to be around them? It can be a really powerful tool for helping us to take that step back and think about what we need.
Two things stand out for me: that our story is still unfolding. We often forget that. And also, like you mentioned, we don't spend time reflecting enough and really taking stock at the end of the day. You can
Yeah.
do it super quick.
Super
Definitely don't
quick.
want to add more things to the burnout space. I love that you mentioned that.
We really don't. And I want to encourage folks, even the humble post-it note. I used to have a day planner, like many of us, like the written ones. And I know folks who still do. When I had that at the end of the week, I would just on a post-it write down my biggest win from the week. And then at the end of the month, I would flip through and see what those biggest wins were. Dr. Shabbir, I don't know, maybe you can tell me about this with our brains, but I would get to the end of the month and I would look at the first week and the win there, and I had already forgotten about it. It felt 6 months ago. I was already like, oh yeah, I did that thing. It had been less like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and my brain had already, whoosh, forgotten it. And so it gave me this little pause to give myself credit for the traction that I was making toward the things that I was working on. So it just doesn't have to be this big meditative practice. It can be if that works for you, but think about what you're already doing in your process. Is there already some ritual you have on Friday afternoons? Or is there already some time built into your calendar at the end of the month or on Mondays? Or can you add it? Or is there already some process? Even if it's just the walk to your car, like what is a way that we can integrate this so that we're reminding ourselves to take this time to reflect a little bit?
Beautiful. Yeah, I love stacking. We're adding things to what we're doing already. And to your earlier point, you're absolutely right. We're talking about end of month reflection. A lot of times we forget what we did yesterday or the morning because, again, we are busy. We're
Yeah.
doing so much. We have lives not just at our work, we're having lives outside of work. And for physicians and other clinicians, medicine is all immersive. It's an experience that you can't step away from. So you're right. And neuroscience wise, we have about 70,000 average thoughts a day. And I'm sure that high achievers have more thoughts than this. This is the average that was come up from a statistic. And off that, predominantly about 70% of them are wired to be negative.
Mm.
So if we're not taking conscious time to celebrate our wins, it happens,
Yeah.
great, it happened. But then what's next? We're just like jumping to that next step.
We don't take enough time to celebrate. And that's very clear in the research on my side, too, which is just looking at how adults approach goals and what it looks like when adults achieve goals. Oftentimes, the things that we have now are the things that we desperately wanted at some point in our lives, but they don't feel that way because we're constantly moving the goalposts, right? Which is just a phrase, almost like a sports metaphor of we say we want this thing, but once we get it, we've already got our eyes on the next thing. And I want to say to our high achievers, that's okay. Your perfectionism and your high achievement, it is a strength. It is absolutely a cool thing that many other people are very jealous of. And like any trait or skill, if it's used to the extreme, it can be really toxic. There is not a personality trait that exists that if it doesn't go to the extreme, it's toxic. Every single trait is that way. Perfectionism and high achievement is the same. And I think just by the nature of those traits, they can get really toxic in our lives. And so I think taking the shame away of it a little bit and just recognizing I'm a perfectionist, I enjoy getting things done. How can I leverage that strength while focusing on being wholehearted? Like for me, I want to read all the time. I love to read, it's my happy place. And so I used my perfectionism. I obsessively track every book that I read in Goodreads so that at the end of the year, I can see my book totals. It makes me really happy. That's me using my perfectionism for good because I'm, instead of obsessively tracking something that maybe isn't contributing to my health and happiness, I'm tracking the hockey romances that I've read or whatever silly thing I'm enjoying, the dragon books that I'm reading about. But that helps to fuel my energy to work on my really big goals. It keeps me focused and happy and healthy. And so figuring out a way to leverage that perfectionism strength for that goal is that to me has opened up a really big world of instead of shaming myself from perfectionism and saying, no, you should focus on self-care, go take a bubble bath and meditate. Oh God, I would just rather do anything else. I would rather walk on hot coals than go take a bubble bath and sit in silence for 20 minutes. It's just not my personality speed. And learning that is okay. I don't have to turn into somebody who's not a perfectionist. I just need to figure out how to leverage those skills and preferences in a way that I can still show up wholehearted, still show up not burnt out, with enough energy to do the things I love and to care for the people that I care about. And so that switch to me has been really helpful. And I hope that the folks who are listening today hear some permission in that to explore what works for them.
Setting our goals minus the shame and being open to exploration, as well as inviting clarity, connecting and anchoring in purpose. That's what we're hoping to leave everyone else with.
What a great summary.
Thank you. So how can everyone get in touch with you? I'm going to put in the link for the TEDx talk that'll be in the show notes. Any key takeaways as we wrap up?
I think the best way to get in touch with me, honestly, is through either LinkedIn or Instagram. I'm very active on both. And I'm happy for folks to reach out. And if they have any questions related to their specific goals, I'll try to help however I can. And if there are additional resources I can point them to, I would love to do that. Just for my high achievers and perfectionists out there, one reminder is that oftentimes when I work with you all and I ask you about your goal, singular, you tell me about your goals, plural, and it turns into a laundry list of things that you feel like you should do. And so if you're feeling that way, I encourage you to list all of those things out and then think about which top 3 would be most meaningful for the life that you want to have right now and give yourself permission to focus on those and treat those as an experiment. Let's experiment a little bit. Let's get clear about what it is that we want and why we want it. Think about the crucial actions that would help us get there. Think about the people that we can surround ourselves with, talk about our goals with, and then experiment, see what happens. And I encourage you to try that. And I promise you, you will be surprised by the results. It's amazing to see the traction that comes from just that experiment and that consistency.
Thank you so much, Dr. Glova. This has been phenomenal.
It was a pleasure to join you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. So please share it or like it or comment on a social media post or write us a 5-star review. Thank us again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.